The whole world was convinced that Tesla and its founder, Elon Musk, were the undisputed leaders in the world of technology and cars of the future. But what happens when that empire suddenly begins to crumble? When Tesla loses more than 50% of its market value in a matter of months, and its sales drop by 70% in Europe, where it was once at the height of its success. What is behind this collapse? And why is the destruction of the world's biggest electric car brand part of a wider global crisis?
Does that help Tesla? I mean, you had Tim Waltz, who was a huge jerk,
This story isn't just about a stock crash and the loss of billions of dollars. It's a story that intertwines politics, trade wars, and one man's personal ambitions. When Donald Trump signed an executive order imposing tariffs on imports, Tesla was the first to suffer. At first glance, this is just an economic move, but in reality, the consequences affected every aspect of the company, from raw material supplies to relations with Europe, which, in response to these tariffs, began to boycott American goods. And Tesla found itself at the center of this tumultuous political storm.
Outperforming as well in some cases, doing better than Tesla. And you just have to think, how much more is this a sustained issue for Tesla going forward, given the fact that you have Elon Musk, who's been very forthright in his opinions, particularly weighing in on politics, particularly in Europe. We've just had the European elections, which Musk has been very focused on. But across the piece, when you look at the performance for Tesla in Europe, it's not just in small countries. There are a lot of countries where Tesla has been performing badly, including in Germany, in the UK, where it has been lagging, and Spain as well.
But what else led to this catastrophic decline? Many believe it's not just the effects of political decisions. One key factor is Elon Musk's personal behavior. His harsh rhetoric, support for controversial political decisions, and growing public discontent has been an unpredictable factor in Tesla's reputation. In Europe, he has been called nothing less than the culprit of all woes. Protests, boycotts, falling sales, all of this has led to complete disillusionment with a brand that once seemed to epitomize innovation and the environmental revolution.
Well, this feels more like a Tesla-only story when you look at just this fall in EV sales for them, that they're suffering across Europe, down 45% in January. The wider EV market in Europe up 37%, so rivals are catching up and performing.
But that's just the beginning. In 2025, as Tesla's sales collapsed and Wall Street went into meltdown, companies started losing investors. As the world's biggest banks and hedge funds began dumping their shares, plunging the company into an even deeper financial crisis, the world began to wonder, was this the end for Tesla, or was its decline just a temporary phase? How could one company and its eccentric leader create such a storm that consumed not only their business, but also shook the world's markets? What was the catalyst for this catastrophe? And most importantly, can Tesla make a comeback, or has its time passed? Get ready, because we are diving into one of the most abrupt and unexpectedly fast transformations in the world of business, where behind every decision is not only money, but also politics, power struggles, and relationships between the world's most influential players.
Well, you will hear people over in Europe say the new Model Y, the Juniper, could be a difference maker, but that's been in that market now for more than a month. And you would think that you'd see a greater snapback if it's going to be a difference maker. Look, we could be wrong. It could be a difference maker once you get the sales for April, May, and June. But when you have a country like Norway, I think the sales were down something like 11% there. I mean, that's a very savvy EV consumer in Norway. And that's long been a strength for Tesla. Very small market, not huge volume, but I think almost all of the vehicles they sell there are electric. And they embraced Tesla long before others. And, you know, the reports there are not encouraging.
When Tesla's stock began to plummet in January 2025, many who had been following the company's story felt their confidence in its future begin to crumble. The world had grown accustomed to the fact that Tesla, like its founder Elon Musk, epitomized continuous growth and innovation. From the moment it entered the market, its electric cars began to set the standard for the entire automotive world. And now, within just a few months, Tesla is experiencing one of the most dramatic downturns in its history. The cause of this collapse is not just economic crisis or random factors. It all started when the company faced massive pressure from Europe, which appeared determined to get back at Tesla for the political moves made by the US. European authorities could not accept the fact that American President Donald Trump imposed so-called tough tariffs on foreign goods, including electric cars, which caused a flurry of discontent in the countries of the European Union. Moreover, these tariffs became a real nightmare for Tesla, as the company depended on supplies of materials and components from all over the world, and especially from Europe and China.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them.
Canada also striking back with new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods, mostly steel and aluminum, but also computers and sporting goods.
It should not be forgotten that even before the introduction of these tariffs, Tesla enjoyed the benefits and support of European countries. Tesla has become not only the leader in the electric car market, but also a symbol of innovative approach in the automotive industry. Since 2018, Tesla's sales in Europe have grown rapidly, and the brand has been at the forefront of a revolution in the automotive industry. But it was in 2025, when tense trade relations between Europe and the US reached a new level, that Tesla began to lose its sanctity. Tariffs that raised the cost of components and cars dramatically increased the price of Tesla products, which immediately affected demand. With increasing competition and a tough price fight, the company had to either lower prices, losing profits, or increase them, which drove customers away.
We've accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations accomplished in 4 years or 8 years, and we are just getting started.
He praised all the domestic actions he has taken so far on immigration.
And I deployed the U.S. military and border patrol to repel the invasion of our country.
And spending cuts.
We are draining the swamp. It's very simple.
But if only tariffs were the main cause of the disaster, it could still be survived. The critical point, however, was Musk's own political statements. His open support for Trump's policies, including his negative attitude toward the European Union, did not go unnoticed. The Tesla leader became the object of fierce criticism, and his personal ambitions, as opposed to his engineering talents, began to bring only harm to the company. Media outlets in Europe launched a wave of protests against his statement about the European Union's harmful economic practices, and Tesla found itself in the midst of a public scandal. Some of its largest European markets, such as Germany and France, began to cancel their contracts with the company. In Germany, mass protests began in response to Musk's political fallout, organized by labor unions and environmental groups against American hegemony and against Tesla, which had become a symbol of what ails Europeans. By the time the first wave of political and economic turmoil caused Tesla's sales to drop 70% in Europe, investment analysts began to lose faith in the company's continued success. Wall Street increasingly began to predict that Tesla might not be able to regain its market position and that its leadership in the electric car segment might be short-lived. Leading banks began to lower their valuations of the company's shares, and investors set on long-term profits began selling off their holdings en masse. In response to the crisis of confidence, analysts began to openly state that Tesla cannot remain in the top if it is not able to quickly adapt to new conditions, and Musk will not be able to change his attitude to political issues affecting its reputation.
And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
Remarkably, declining investor confidence and falling sales in Europe were only the beginning. As early as February 2025, Tesla faced an unexpected turn of events. As Musk continued to make harsh political statements, including those related to climate policy and technology such as electric cars, began to lose their appeal to European consumers. Pressured by Chinese and European competitors, Tesla seemed to have lost its former image as a pioneer and inspiration. While companies such as Volkswagen and Renault offered better prices and cars adapted to European standards, Tesla fell by the wayside. At some point, when Tesla lost more than 70% of its market in Europe, it became clear that the company's crisis was not limited to the continent. It was a worldwide phenomenon. Amid political tensions with Europe and growing competition from Chinese manufacturers, Tesla was going through not only a marketing meltdown, but also an internal restructuring.
Teslas are being torched across the country. Dealerships shot up and set on fire. Spray paint to vandalize and make a statement. People in Southern California are getting notes on their Teslas, calling them complicit Nazis for owning electric cars.
At one point, the European market became a real battleground for Tesla. Local electric car makers began aggressive expansion, promising competitive prices and local production without political risks. Against this background, Tesla, which has long been synonymous with advanced technology, has become a target for criticism. The company began to be attacked not only by political observers but also by its former fans, which was a blow to its reputation. Now, with a 70% drop in sales and significant market losses in Europe, the company found itself in a precarious situation in which not only its leader but also Tesla itself faced a difficult choice. Should it continue to fight or recognize that the company that once seemed flawless could no longer regain its former glory and prestige?
Over the last couple of months. But the other thing that this could potentially be is an attempt at readjustment or correction by the Trump administration, in that one of Trump's closest kind of allies and supporters, and someone who's clearly very influential in the administration, is coming out to kind of push back against the recently implemented policies. So I'm thinking, or maybe hopeful is the right word, that this might be a signal that the administration is considering walking back some of those policies.
When Tesla's stock began to lose more than 50% of its value in March 2025, the impact of this collapse was not just limited to the stock market. It became increasingly clear that the disaster that had befallen the company was not only affecting the electric car market, but also panicking investors and jeopardizing its future. The loss of over $400 billion in market capitalization was not just numbers. It was an alarm bell that could not be ignored. The reasons for this decline were multifaceted, and at the center of it all were not only economic factors, but also Musk's own personal intervention.
Tesla shares have slumped by more than 9% amid a fall in sales in Europe. The electric vehicle maker posted lower sales across 5 European countries, including France and the UK. Joining us now to discuss this is CBS News foreign correspondent Remy Inocencio. Remy, why do we believe these sales are dropping? What's driving that?
Sure. Well, Errol, basically what Elon Musk has been talking about over the past, say, few months, ever since Donald Trump's election back to the White House, that has been fueling this anger, this frustration, some even say disgust towards Musk, and they're taking it out on Tesla. Tesla now feeling the pain. But because of what's happening here in Europe, Tesla sales fell by nearly half across the continent just last month, 45%.
After Tesla lost its position in the European market, the situation on Wall Street became increasingly tense. The crisis was so deep-rooted that many analysts began to revise their forecasts for the company. And as it turned out, not all of them were optimistic. Tesla's stock drop wasn't random or temporary. It was the result of a chain reaction that began with deteriorating relations with Europe and continued with a wave of stock sales driven by a loss of confidence from large investors. Institutional investors who had previously considered Tesla an integral part of their portfolio began to sharply reduce their investments. At the end of March 2025, major banks including Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan lowered their forecasts for the company. As the stock continued to fall, giants such as Vanguard and BlackRock began withdrawing their funds, accelerating the sell-off on the stock. However, the biggest threat to Tesla came not from the world of finance, but from the company's internal politics. Musk, as before, actively voiced support for Trump and his policy decisions, which in turn made relations with key markets very difficult. During this time, Musk continued to use his platforms to make public statements, which couldn't help but affect Tesla's reputation. His aggressive rhetoric toward European leaders, which he called parasites and anti-innovation, only added to the discontent. In Germany, protests against Tesla took to the streets, and the UK even organized mass actions in support, of local manufacturers who were suffering from increased tariffs on car components. These actions not only worsened Tesla's image, but also gave additional political coloring to the whole conflict, which eventually resulted in mass discontent among both consumers and employees of the company.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States.
At the same time, the threat from the other side, the internal conflict, began to grow inside Tesla. The working atmosphere in some of its large plants, such as those in Texas and beyond, became toxic. In mid-2025, mass complaints from employees began, and this situation soon led to actual unionization attempts at some of Tesla's plants. Workers complained about high production standards, unfulfilled promises to improve working conditions, and unreasonable delays in payments and wage increases. In response, company management tried to appease employees with promises of improvements, but those promises remained unfulfilled. By the time Tesla's stock lost more than half of its value, the internal turmoil had become a serious factor that could undermine not only its financial health, but its entire operating model.
Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe, including Harley-Davidson motorcycles and Kentucky bourbon. President Trump with the Irish Prime Minister visiting the White House today. The president suggesting his tariffs won't stop here, saying, "Of course, I'm going to respond." And tonight, right here, the new poll showing 56% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. The number's even worse now on the president's tariffs.
By the time the Wall Street crisis reached its climax, new problems began to emerge as the brand's reputation deteriorated. Falling stocks and plummeting sales in Europe were only the visible part of a more complex and deeper crisis. Tesla, which used to be considered a success story for an American company in the global marketplace, suddenly found itself at the center of a scandal. The press, which had once marveled at the company's every new move, now accused it of political incompetence and an inability to adapt to a changing global market. Reputational losses began to affect its sales not only in Europe but also in the United States. In New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, news of major cancellations of orders for Tesla cars began to appear, and buyers began to look en masse at offers from competitors as Volkswagen, Hyundai, and Chinese manufacturers BYD and NIO.
But they are not ruling out the possibility that this was arson. At the same time, as you just mentioned, there are groups that have been organizing ongoing and peaceful protests at Tesla dealerships around the world. These demonstrations targeting Elon Musk and his affiliation with the Trump administration. Also, Italy's prime minister is said to be close friends with Musk, and there were reports that Teslas have been vandalized in her hometown in Italy. Diane.
The press and the public were outraged not only by Musk's political actions, but also by the deteriorating quality of Tesla cars. Reports of frequent breakdowns, battery problems, and even complaints of software glitches surfaced. These problems became a major theme in news reports that had previously publicized Tesla as the undisputed leader in the electric car market. All of this was happening against the backdrop of companies like Nissan and Chevrolet starting to aggressively develop their own lines of electric cars, offering similar features at lower prices. In such a situation, as consumers began to lose confidence and Tesla's reputation was severely damaged, questions about its future became more and more pressing. Over the next few weeks, the situation only got worse. After media reports began circulating about declining demand for Tesla cars in the US and Europe, the company came under pressure not only from external circumstances, but also from internal strife. Musk continued to remain in the center of attention, but his actions did not help Tesla, but on the contrary, only exacerbated its problems. Amid falling sales and prices, Musk was not ready to back down. He continued to fight desperately with critics, which only made things worse, and in fact, turned into a final act of desperation. Some analysts began to predict that Tesla would no longer return to the level of success it once had.
I mean, the things that he's doing is not trying to make America better. He's ruining our infrastructure, every department in our government. He's ruining, and he's right now destroying our economy. He's taken away all of our allies. We're a pariah in the world.
As Tesla's global crisis reached its climax, the situation began to take on even darker shades. On the surface, the company appeared to be consumed by internal and external problems, but in reality, it was facing an even greater challenge. Against a backdrop of political instability and a growing financial abyss, a massive struggle for survival in the world of electric cars was beginning to develop within Tesla itself. In order to understand how Tesla's future fate would develop, it is necessary to consider how it planned to cope with geopolitical risks and adapt to the new conditions of the global economy. One of the main questions posed by analysts and investors was whether Tesla would be able to restore its manufacturing strategy, changing it to fit the new realities, where protecting local markets and reducing dependence on global supplies have become key themes. Against this backdrop, Tesla not only had to adapt its production facilities, but also tackle the supply of critical materials such as lithium and nickel, which the company had previously purchased overseas. The turmoil caused by the tariff hike jeopardized even its basic operations, leaving the company vulnerable to competitors.
Tesla is a peaceful company. We've never done anything harmful. I've never done anything harmful. I've only done productive things. So I think we just have a deranged, there's some kind of mental illness thing going on here, because this doesn't make any sense.
Complicating matters was the fact that most of Tesla's suppliers were located outside the US, and in response to Trump's trade sanctions, many of them began changing contract terms. Supply issues such as lithium, which was now taxed with additional fees, dramatically increased the cost of production. To cope with this challenge, Tesla decided to refocus on domestic sourcing, but rebuilding supply chains within the US proved less straightforward. As soon as Musk announced plans to ramp up production at plants in Texas and Nevada, it became clear that US capacity couldn't effectively replace European or Asian supplies. By the time another plant in Canada was announced in the first half of 2025, news of it went almost unnoticed amid the general downturn. It became apparent to many that these plans would not be a short-term fix.
KTLA Samantha Cortese joins us live with more on the wave of vandalism in protest of Elon Musk and his role in Washington. Sam?
Hi, Sharon, Micah. The ATF and FBI are collaborating with federal, state, and local law enforcement to investigate acts of domestic terrorism surrounding Teslas.
Amid geopolitical twists and turns and turmoil on Tesla's production lines, the company was forced to take steps to strengthen its position in the market. However, its competitors have not been slumbering. European companies like Volkswagen and Renault filled the niche that Tesla had left empty. They began offering consumers more affordable and higher quality electric cars, which now had less political pressure. Volkswagen, in particular, used the growing popularity of its new i.4 model to increase its market share while lowering new car prices. This policy had a strong impact on demand for Tesla cars in Europe, especially in Germany and France, where the brand had previously been a leader. But now, with economic instability and political reactions to US actions, Tesla found itself in a difficult situation where its model could easily be replaced by more competitive offerings. So, Tesla found itself in a situation where its survival depended on multiple factors. First of all, on its ability to cope with the political consequences of the trade wars. Secondly, on restoring its image and trust among consumers. And thirdly, on how quickly it could adapt its manufacturing strategy to the new environment. But even if Tesla is able to regain its market position, the question remains, is it too late for a company that was once a symbol of American innovation and technological progress?